Berry Gordy is a man I do not know. I only met him about 3 times. I really don't know anything about him. I just know he didn't particularly care for me. I guess he had his reason.
I guess he knew how to get to me because he wanted, which he always said, he wanted to control me. And if he couldn't control me, then he didn't want me around.
A lot of the tension wasn't really over that.
Okay, what was it over?
Some of the tension was basically about, financial matters.
Motown kept hidden some of the darkest stories for years, like the fact that it destroyed more careers than it ever created. From Florence Ballard, who got banned from using the name of the group she founded.
It seemed like I was always under pressure from Barry.
To Tammi Terrell, who was worked to death while brain cancer killed her.
If I had Tammi, you're dying, you're gonna die, I think she would have died right then and there. Some can take that type of information and some can't.
Then there was Marvin Gaye's bitter exit.
Look upon the Motown days as the good old days.
No.
No.
Here are the stories they buried. Berry Gordy borrowed $800 from his parents in 1959.
And, the story about Motown started off with, what, $650 or something?
Well, that's a little glorified, okay? It's a much longer story than that.
Within 5 years, he was worth millions, while the artists who made him rich were broke. Gordy hung Napoleon's portrait in his office because he saw himself as a conqueror. His artists were just soldiers to be used and discarded. Motown contracts were traps disguised as opportunities. Artists signed thinking they were getting 2.7% royalties on their records. They didn't know that Motown charged them for everything: studio time, travel, hotel rooms, costumes, even backup singers. Most artists ended up owing Motown money despite having hit records. The system was simple. Multiple artists would record the same song. Gordy picked the best version for release. Everyone else still paid for their studio time. Young singers from Detroit's projects would spend their life savings recording songs that never saw daylight, while Gordy pocketed the money. Renoma Lyles helped Gordy start the label. She became his wife and business partner.
I was there before Motown. We actually this thing started happening in 1958. And it started with the Raber Music Writing Company. And this is when I met Berry Gordy.
When money got tight in the early days, she turned to prostitution to keep Motown afloat. Years later, when she tried to publish her autobiography telling this story, Gordy bought up copies from distributors to keep it quiet. The woman who sacrificed her body to build his empire became an embarrassment he needed to erase. Gordy modeled Motown after Detroit's assembly lines. Artists were raw materials to be processed into products. If they broke down or caused problems, they were replaced. The hit factory needed workers, not partners.
At Ford, because I couldn't make enough money writing songs, and I would notice how the cars on the assembly line would come down. They'd come in a bare metal frame, and they go out a brand new car. And they have their quality control where they would check different things, but each station would go and it would move along, and I saw that. So I got the idea that why don't I start an assembly line for singers?
Young black performers had no other options. Major labels wouldn't touch them. Gordy offered the only path to white audiences and mainstream success. Desperate people signed whatever contracts he put in front of them. They thought they were escaping poverty. They were actually entering a different kind of slavery. Gordy understood psychology. He made artists compete against each other for his approval. He praised some while ignoring others. He created jealousy and insecurity within groups. Divided artists were easier to control than united ones. The Musicians' Union tried to organize Motown's session players. Gordy threatened to move operations to non-union states. The Funk Brothers, who played on more #1 hits than the Beatles and Rolling Stones combined, worked for $5 to $10 per session when union rates were $50. They stayed because Gordy promised them album deals that never materialized.
Finally, when the dust cleared,
it was all over. And we realized we were being left out of the dream.
Motown's employee handbook banned fraternization between established artists and newcomers. Gordy didn't want veteran performers teaching rookies about the business. Knowledge was power, and he wanted all the power concentrated in his hands. By 1965, Motown was generating $30 million annually. The artists creating this wealth were still living in Detroit's housing projects, taking buses to recording sessions while Gordy bought mansions and luxury cars. The hit factory was working perfectly for him. Florence Ballard founded the Supremes. She chose the name. She had the strongest voice. None of that mattered when Berry Gordy decided Diana Ross would make him more money. What happened next was a masterclass in psychological destruction. Gordy started by taking away Florence's songs. People was written for her voice, powerful, gospel-trained, emotionally rich. He gave it to Diana instead. Diana had gotten a D in singing at school, but she had light skin and fine features. Gordy believed white audiences would prefer her. The torture escalated when Gordy brought Cindy Birdsong to rehearsals. He made her learn the Supremes' choreography. He had costumes made in her size. He never told Florence why, but the message was clear. Someone was being trained to replace her. Florence started drinking, not because she was unprofessional, but because she was watching her life's work being stolen. Gordy used her drinking as evidence that she was the problem. He told her she was too fat, too difficult, too unreliable. He made her question her own sanity.
It seemed like I was always under pressure from Berry.
Meanwhile, Diana got her own dressing room, her own limousine, special treatment that the other Supremes never received. When Florence and Mary complained, they were told they were being jealous and unprofessional. Gordy was breaking up the group by creating inequality within it. Berry's sister Gwen played enforcer. When Florence finally snapped and said she was quitting, Gwen calmly explained that Florence couldn't leave. Her contract bound her to Motown. She was trapped in a group where she was no longer wanted, watching someone else perform her songs. July 1st, 1967, was Florence's 24th birthday. The next night, she performed drunk at the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas. She let her stomach stick out of her costume, a final act of defiance. She knew Cindy Birdsong was waiting backstage with a dress in Florence's size.
They had Cindy Birdsong was there, and they had been grooming her with tapes for a whole year, and I didn't even have any knowledge of it.
Gordy fired her the next morning. The group became Diana Ross and the Supremes that same day. Florence was forced to sign papers giving up her rights to the Supreme name, her past recordings, and future royalties. She got $15,000 for founding the most successful female group in music history. Florence was forbidden from ever claiming she had been a Supreme in any future promotional materials. They didn't just fire her, they erased her from history. Diana Ross showed up to Florence's funeral in 1976. She sat in the family section and held Florence's youngest daughter on her lap for the cameras. The woman who had helped destroy Florence's life was now posing as her grieving friend. Some people in the church booed her. The Temptations were 5 men in matching suits, moving like one person. Behind the choreography, Berry Gordy was running a different show. He was deliberately breaking up the group by turning the members against each other. David Ruffin had the voice that made My Girl a classic. Gordy fed his ego while poisoning the group dynamic. He praised David's singing while criticizing the others. He encouraged David to demand special treatment. His own limo, top billing, bigger dressing rooms. Gordy knew an inflated ego would destroy group unity. Was everywhere at Motown parties. Gordy never handed out directly, but he created an environment where addiction was inevitable. When David's use made him unreliable, Gordy used it as justification to replace him. David was kicked out of the group he had helped make famous. Paul Williams faced different torture. The founding member who created the Temptations' signature moves was slowly marginalized. His health problems and drinking were met with indifference. Motown kept him on payroll, but treated him like broken equipment.
Paul did more harm to himself than he ever did to the Temptation. In fact, he never did any harm to the Temptation. He did it more to himself.
On August 17, 1973, Paul Williams was found dead in his car with a gunshot wound to the head. The death was ruled but questions remained. How does a left-handed man shoot himself in the right temple? Paul's family suspected foul play, but the investigation went nowhere. Even after Paul's death, the remaining Temptations were expected to keep performing. Grief was bad for business. The group that had represented Black Brotherhood was now a warning about the price of success in Gordy's empire. David Ruffin's solo career crumbled under the weight of his addiction and Gordy's blacklisting.
But this is Detroit's most recent memory of David Ruffin in court, facing charges, defended as a broken drug addict so out of control that court orders, friends, not even the threat of jail could keep him in a treatment program.
The man who sang lead on Motown's biggest hits ended up broke and desperate, sometimes showing up uninvited to Temptations concerts and jumping on stage. Security had to drag him away from the group he had once led. The Temptations learned that in Gordy's world, no one was irreplaceable. If David Ruffin could be discarded so easily, what did that say about their own security? The fear kept them in line, too terrified to demand better treatment or fair compensation. Gordy had turned 5 friends into competitors. He made them fight each other for his approval instead of uniting against their exploitation. The group that sang about brotherhood had become a collection of frightened individuals afraid to trust each other. By the 1970s, the classic Temptations lineup was gone. Death, drugs, and mental breakdown had claimed most of the original members. The name survived, but the men who created the legend were either dead or destroyed. Gordy had consumed his own greatest creation. Tammi Terrell collapsed into Marvin Gaye's arms on stage in October 1967. Brain cancer was killing her. Motown's response was to work her harder. The brain tumor wasn't Tammy's first trauma. James Brown had beaten her so badly she was left covered in blood. David Ruffin attacked her with hammers and machetes. The connection between head trauma and brain cancer would haunt everyone who knew her story.
It was physical, and they hit each other, and they hit each other in the head. I think her weakness and her failing was wanting to be loved. Demons. And it all probably stemmed back from being...
When doctors found the malignant tumor, Motown treated it as a business problem. They couldn't lose their hottest duet act. So they created a cruel deception. New Marvin and Tammi records using old Tammi vocals or substitute singers. Tammi underwent 8 brain surgeries between 1967 and 1970.
If I had Tammi, you died. You're gonna die. I think she would have died right then and there. Some can take that type of information and some can't.
Between operations, when she was strong enough to stand, Motown dragged her into recording studios. When she was too weak to sing, they used Valerie Simpson's voice and pretended it was Tammi. Marvin Gaye watched his duet partner deteriorate. He called the recording sessions another money-making scheme on Barry's part. The woman who brought joy to their performances was being reduced to a product. Her suffering was measured only by its impact on record sales. As the cancer progressed, Tammi lost her sight and most of her body weight. She needed a wheelchair. Her hair fell out from chemotherapy. She weighed 93 pounds by her final surgery. Motown continued marketing her image and releasing new music while she was dying. Fans had no idea how sick Tammi really was. They kept buying records thinking she was healthy and happy. Motown's publicity machine maintained the illusion while the woman behind the music wasted away in hospital beds. When Tammi died on March 16, 1970, 1 month before her 25th birthday, her mother banned everyone from Motown from the funeral. Everyone except Marvin Gaye. She recognized him as Tammy's only true friend at the label.
She said, well, I don't want him in the funeral. I said, you what? She said, I don't want him in the funeral. She said, Marvin can come, but she said the rest of them cannot come.
The funeral ban was a devastating indictment. A mother was telling the world that the record label had failed her dying daughter. Motown had literally worked a young woman to death, extracting every possible dollar from her talent while cancer consumed her brain. Tammi Terrell's death revealed Motown's true nature. A label built on celebrating black love had exploited a dying woman for profit. Her voice lived on in the records, but the person behind the music had been sacrificed to Berry Gordy's greed. Mary Wells was Motown's first female star. My Guy and Two Lovers established the label as legitimate competition for major records companies.
But I've got two lovers and
When her contract expired in 1964, she made a decision that would destroy her life. She left Motown for a better deal. Mary's mistake was believing she deserved fair compensation. When she asked Motown's accounting department to explain her royalty statements, she got vague answers and incomplete paperwork. The company's books were deliberately confusing, designed to hide the true extent of their exploitation.
I mean, here you got a little ghetto girl with a working mother, no father in the house, and I mean, poor as poor can get.
20th Century Fox offered Mary a contract that seemed revolutionary. Better royalty rates, creative control, backing from a major entertainment company. She signed with them, thinking she was finally getting the respect she deserved. She didn't understand that leaving Motown meant declaring war on Berry Gordy. Gordy's retaliation was swift and total. He used his industry connections to make Mary Wells unemployable. Radio stations that had played her records suddenly found reasons to pass on her new releases. Booking agents who had fought to book her discovered that their other Motown acts might not be available if they continued working with Mary. The psychological warfare went beyond business. Mary received anonymous phone calls threatening her safety and her children's lives. Her new record label gradually reduced promotional support as they realized the cost of crossing Berry Gordy. The woman who had once commanded top billing found herself struggling for radio airplay. Mary's 20th Century Fox contract became worthless when the industry turned against her. Quality recordings got no radio play because Gordy had blacklisted her. Booking agents stopped returning her calls. The woman who had established Motown as a viable label was now a pariah in the industry she had helped create. The blacklisting campaign lasted for years. Mary never recovered her career momentum. She spent the rest of her life fighting for recognition and compensation for the music that had built Motown's foundation. Her later years were marked by financial struggle and declining health. Laryngeal cancer eventually killed Mary Wells. The woman whose voice had first brought Motown to national attention died in relative obscurity.
The cancer came back. It's 2 small tumors that's in the lungs. It's a small tumor on the vocal.
Even after death, she remained a tale within Motown's walls. Proof that loyalty to Berry Gordy was not optional. Mary Wells had committed an unforgivable sin. She believed she deserved better treatment than what Berry Gordy offered. For that act of self-advocacy, she paid with her career, her financial security, and ultimately her life. Holland Dozier Holland wrote the songs that made Motown famous. Where Did Our Love Go? Stop. In the Name of Love. I Can't Help Myself. Over 20 #1 hits that generated millions for Berry Gordy. Their reward was minimal royalties and no ownership of their own compositions.
It's got to be a lot of love and a work ethic that we all three of us shared and worked around the clock, 14, 15, 16 hours a day.
Eddie Holland, Lamont Dozier, and Brian Holland discovered that Gordy had been selling shares in Jobette Music, his publishing company, without telling them. Their songs were being monetized in ways they never agreed to, generating profits they would never see. When they confronted Gordy, he dismissed their concerns like complaints from ungrateful employees. The trio's contracts made them glorified employees. Every song they wrote for Motown became Gordy's property through Jobette Music. They were creating wealth for him while struggling to support their own families. Eddie Holland watched Diana Ross get rich singing his lyrics while he could barely pay rent. When Holland Dozier Holland announced they were leaving Motown in 1967, Gordy filed lawsuits claiming they were under exclusive contract. He obtained injunctions preventing them from using their own names professionally. The men who had created Motown's most valuable assets were treated like escaped slaves being returned to their master. The legal battles consumed years and drained the trio's finances. While they fought for freedom in court, they couldn't work in the music industry. Their careers were frozen while Motown continued profiting from the catalog they had created. The songs that made Berry Gordy rich became weapons against their own creators.
If the song was the best song for that artist, no matter who produced or wrote that song would go out.
Motown's creative decline began with HDH's departure. Without their hit-making magic, the label struggled to maintain commercial dominance. But Gordy preferred losing his most successful songwriters to treating them as equal partners. Control was more important than continued success. The legal victory came too late to save their careers. Holland Dozier Holland had won their freedom but lost years of productive life. They proved that even Motown's most essential contributors were disposable in Berry Gordy's vision of the music business. The man who preached black capitalism and economic empowerment had systematically destroyed three black men whose talents made him wealthy beyond imagination. Their rebellion failed because Gordy had structured the system to make rebellion impossible. The Jackson 5 should have been Berry Gordy's crowning achievement. 5 talented brothers from Gary, Indiana, who could sing, dance, and charm any audience. Instead, their story became another lesson about the price of success in Gordy's empire. Joe Jackson brought his sons to Motown, hoping to escape Indiana's steel mills. He delivered his children into a system designed to extract maximum profit while providing minimal compensation. The Jackson 5's contract was exploitative even by Motown standards. Tiny royalties, massive deductions, and complete ownership of their name and image. The boys were immediately enrolled in artist development, which was actually cultural indoctrination. They learned to speak, dress, and move for white audiences. Their natural Gary personalities were stripped away and replaced with sanitized versions Gordy felt would be more commercially viable. Michael Jackson was 11 when he signed to Motown. His childhood was sacrificed for Berry Gordy's ambition. While other children played and attended school, Michael was rehearsing, recording, touring, and learning to be a product rather than a person. The psychological damage would affect him for life. The family's financial arrangement kept them dependent on Motown. Living expenses, recording costs, and promotional fees were deducted from their royalties. They were wealthy on paper but cash poor in reality, always owing money to the company supposedly making them rich. As the brothers matured and understood their exploitation, tensions with Motown intensified. They wanted creative control and fair compensation. Gordy viewed these desires as ingratitude and insubordination. The man who preached black empowerment was unwilling to share power with the black artists who had made him wealthy. the Jackson family left Motown for Epic Records in 1975. Gordy's response was characteristically vengeful. He refused to let them use the name Jackson 5, forcing them to rebrand as the Jacksons. More devastating, he retained ownership of all their Motown recordings. Legal documents revealed the true extent of exploitation. Despite generating millions in revenue, the Jackson family had received only a tiny fraction of the money their talents created. They had been Gordy's most profitable artists while remaining among his poorest compensated performers. Michael Jackson's later problems with addiction, isolation, and industry distrust traced back to his Motown childhood. The label that promised to make him a star had created a damaged individual who never learned to trust his own judgment or value himself outside his commercial appeal. The Marvelettes recorded Please Mr. Postman, Motown's first #1 pop hit. By the 1980s, they were working day jobs and fighting in court for the right to use their own name. Their story shows the most insidious aspect of Berry Gordy's business, the theft of artistic identity.
It's the love of the music that keeps people from complaining, I think.
Is it just about the money?
It's not just about the money. My pride has been hurt.
Gladys Horton, Wanda Young, and the other Marvelettes were high school students from Inkster, Michigan, when they auditioned for Motown in 1961. They signed whatever contracts were put in front of them, trusting that adults would treat them fairly. They were signing away their music and their identities as performers. Motown's contract gave the label ownership of the name Marvelettes, their logo, image, and brand. When lineup changes occurred due to marriages or pregnancies, Berry Gordy could replace departing members without consulting original members. The Marvelettes became a corporate asset to be modified at will. Gladys Horton temporarily left to have a baby. When she tried to return, she found that Motown had replaced her and restructured the group around different vocalists. The woman whose voice created Motown's first pop #1 was told she was no longer needed in the group she had helped form. Despite massive success, Please Mr. Postman sold over 1 million copies. The Marvelettes received minimal royalties. Recording costs, promotional expenses, and mysterious administrative fees consumed most of their earnings. They created wealth for Berry Gordy, while remaining poor themselves. When the group tried to leave Motown in the late 1960s, they discovered their contract prevented them from performing as Marvelettes anywhere else. They couldn't tour, record, or promote themselves using the identity they had created because Berry Gordy owned it. The situation became surreal in the 1980s when Motown began licensing the Marvelettes name to different groups for nostalgia tours. Audiences attended shows believing they were seeing original members, while the real Marvelettes worked regular jobs with no legal recourse to stop the impersonation. Legal battles consumed years and resources the original members didn't have. While they eventually won some court cases, the victories came too late to salvage their careers or financial security. The women who helped establish Motown spent their later years fighting for crumbs from the empire they had built. The Marvelettes' tragedy wasn't just financial, it was existential. They had been erased from their own story, reduced to footnotes in the history of music they had created. Berry Gordy had stolen not just their money, but their right to exist as the artists they truly were. Anyway, that's it for the video, folks. Bye.